It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Jeff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday morning at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. Now, back at the end of September and beginning of October, I covered the incredibly popular Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 on this show, and let's return to the filmography of Sam Raimi. So you might think that I'm looking to the third film in the Evil Dead series, Army of Darkness, but no, I'm throwing a curveball and going ahead on his timeline to 2009's Drag Me to Hell. One of the larger misconceptions that I think people have about Sam Raimi is that he is almost exclusively considered a horror film director. And while the Evil Dead trilogy is considered one of the greatest series in the horror genre, particularly in modern day horror, 2000's The Gift, starring Cate Blanchett, and 2009's Drag Me to Hell were the only other two horror films that he directed himself. Between the Spider-Man trilogy, Darkman, and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, Raimi's made as many superhero films as he has horror films. And granted, there are elements that he used in those 5 superhero movies that borrow from some of those horror sensibilities that he had making the Evil Dead movies, and he has produced several horror films over the years, but Raimi really is more than just a horror guy. Still, there's always going to be room to include him here in Monster Mondays, for sure. Drag Me to Hell was conceived by Sam and Ivan Raimi in the late 90s. Interesting that it was conceived then, because as it plays out, the movie is often looked at as something that a lot of people think have themes that align with the late aughts Great Recession and mortgage crisis. But Raimi himself really just thinks of it more as a morality horror tale where someone who is generally good makes an unforgivable decision that spins the horror out from that. And really, the movie's plot and idea is even older. Some elements are directly inspired by the 1957 British film Night of the Demon, which deals with curses and demonic activities and so on. And in fact, the look of the demon in this movie owes a lot to that earlier film, and the concept of the 3-day curse comes from that plot too. But the movie was placed on the back burner as Sam Raimi was given the opportunity to make the Spider-Man films. This led to him eventually offering the movie to director Edgar Wright, but Wright was making Hot Fuzz at the time and passed on the project. So eventually Raimi, having completed Spider-Man 3, returned to the script and wanted to make it on a lower budget and make it much simpler of a movie. And I'm guessing that had to be mostly due to his recently being in charge of 3 gigantic productions with one of the most recognizable comic book heroes ever. Now, starring as Christine in this movie is Alison Lohman. Now, Lohman was a pretty popular actress in the mid to late aughts. Her breakout was in 2002's White Oleander, where she led the film, which co-starred pretty big names such as Michelle Pfeiffer, Robin Wright, and Renee Zellweger. And I remember her being quite good in Matchstick Men, in which she co-starred with Nicolas Cage and Sam Rockwell. That was directed by Ridley Scott. That same year that she was also in Tim Burton's Big Fish. And then in 2005, she starred in an Adam Agoyan film with Kevin Bacon and Colin Firth called Where the Truth Lies. However, Drag Me to Hell would be one of her final roles that she would have. She met filmmaker Mark Neveldine of the Neveldine and Brian Taylor high action directing duo, and then she retired from acting to raise their kids. And she has since gone into teaching acting online. Now, the movie opens in 1969 with Mexican parents bringing their son to someone who they beg for help from because they say that the kid is hearing voices that keep getting louder each and every day that passes. When they bring him into the home of the spirit medium, he sees hands on the other side of a stained glass skylight kind of trying to get into the place. Soon, an unseen force busts into the home and slaps his parents and the medium around before sending the kid over a railing where the floor opens up and demonic hands drag the boy into hell. 40 years later, we meet Lohman's Christine Brown, who is a bank loan officer. And she's kind of meek and always trying to be nice and do good things for people. But she's in a competition with another coworker for a promotion. The other guy, as her boss says, makes tough decisions. In addition, she's been dating a professor played by Justin Long, whose parents aren't so keen on him dating a girl who grew up on a farm as kind of what they think of as a country bumpkin. So she overhears their displeasure about that, and they kind of want to set, or at least the mom wants to set him up with someone with higher standing. So when she gets back to the office after kind of hearing that, she doesn't make these tough decisions and she's a little too nice and she's not really doing the right things for the bank, she watches her competition schmooze the boss with tickets to a basketball game. And she's approached by an elderly Roma woman who needs an extension on her mortgage. She's had some health issues. She's got some. She's living on a very, very fixed budget. And when she tries to appeal to her boss, he explains that it could cost the bank a considerable amount of money they could get from repossessing the house and fees from processing over to a new landowner. And she's kind of faced with that tough decision that might lead to her getting that promotion. So she opts to decline the request for the extension, which leads to the old woman making a scene as she tries to beg for that extension. When Christine calls for security after being left kind of completely off guard by this display, the woman says that she begged for forgiveness and Christine shamed her. She then lunges at Christine in an angry tirade. Later, her boss is impressed and tells her that she's now at the top of the list to get that promotion. When she leaves the office that night, she sees the old woman's car and her handkerchief kind of floating toward the car. Then the old woman attacks Christine from the back seat, forcing Christine to have to fight for her life. After grabbing a button from Christine's coat, she speaks in a different language, causing Christine to slowly black out. And the woman has placed the button back in her hand and tells Christine that soon it will be her who will be begging. Later, she asks her boyfriend Clay if she maybe should have just granted the old lady an extension, but he says that she needed to basically stand her ground here. And Christine then decides that she wants to get her fortune read after being kind of freaked out by everything that's going on. And as the fortune teller named Ram Jas reads her palm, he sees a flash of a demonic face and tells her that either she's been playing with the dark arts or she's been cursed. Clay, of course, thinks all of this is a scam and doesn't really want to believe any of it. Later still that night, Christine hears strange noises around her house, and a wind comes in and rattles the pots and pans and the furniture and everything inside. She also sees a shadow of something that looks like a creature in smoke that then turns into a horned demon, and that she can't really see anything physical, but it still knocks her down nonetheless. As she sleeps that night, a fly comes into the bedroom, and it annoys her at first by landing on her face, but then it works her way up one of her nostrils and then comes out the other before forcing its way into her mouth. She wakes up briefly only to find the old lady lying next to her and attacks before eventually barfing worms and goop onto her face. She wakes up from that, and that was just a nightmare. And when she gets to work the next morning, she feels a fluttering in her stomach. And she also starts hallucinating the old woman's gross fingernails tapping impatiently on her desk before her nose starts bleeding and she both vomits and sprays blood out of her nose and all over her manager's face. Christine goes to the old woman's house, and the woman's granddaughter answers the door and asks if Christine was once a real fat girl before telling her she isn't welcome here. Christine just basically gets it from all angles in this, but she does eventually get entry to the house after she says that she'll make everything right with her grandmother. When she goes inside, she discovers that the old woman has recently died and there's a raging Roma funeral happening. And she accidentally runs into the old woman's coffin, knocking it over and causing the woman's body to fall on Christine and spill a bunch of green embalming goop onto her face. Christine sees Ramjas again, who tells her that she's probably cursed with a lamia, a goat-like creature that will torment her for 3 days before dragging her soul to hell. One way to maybe appease the lamia is a sacrifice, but Christine says she could never do that to another animal. However, as the disturbances at night get more and more intense, she reluctantly decides to sacrifice her kitten. She initially believes that has saved her from the curse, so she and Clay go to his parents' palatial estate for dinner. While her father is kind of warm to Christine, especially as she explains what she does at the bank and how she is positioning herself for a promotion at the bank, she has to kind of painfully win over Clay's bitchy mother. As she does so, she begins hearing strange noises. She then sees her piece of harvest cake has the old woman's eye in it. And that kicks off a whole bunch more auditory hallucinations that leads to her coughing out the fly that was in her stomach previously. When Clay's mother sees what looks like maybe raisins or, for all she knows, bugs in her piece of cake, she spits out her piece, and then Christine sees a shadow under the dining room door, and she yells at it and throws a glass at the door, which then sours the entire evening. She returns to Ramjas, who tells her that there was no guarantee that the sacrifice would work, so he tells her that has a kind of last resort. He needs $10,000 in cash, and he can call that medium from 1969 to speak directly to the Lamia to convince it to not take her soul to hell. She can't get an advance on her pending promotion because that big deal that she was working on that would have probably sealed the deal ended up being canceled as that loan went to another bank. She tries selling all of her most valuable stuff, but it just simply isn't enough. However, Clay comes in to save the day. He says that he's paid Ramjas the $10,000 because he's had a change of heart, because he doesn't really know what he believes is happening to her, but he knows that she's hurting. So even though he doesn't believe or fully understand what she's going through, he made a promise to always take care of her and look after her. So here we go. Ramjas, Christine, and that medium, Sean Sandima, are now going to try to commune with the Lamia to save herself from the curse. And it's all pretty intense for Christine. There are lots of ghostly things that can be seen coming at her or just floating around. The place shakes. Those sounds that she hears are deafening for everyone. But finally, the Lamia inhabits the body of Sean Sandima, and Christine is able to help kind of transfer the Lamia to a goat that was brought in that will ultimately be sacrificed to get rid of the spirit. However, after doing so, the goat bites the hand of Sean's assistant before he could kill the goat and transfers the Lamia into him. Sean then expels the Lamia, but in doing so, she dies from a heart attack. Worse, the Lamia is still coming for the person who possessed the cursed object, Christine's coat's button. So Ramjas says that she can only be saved by giving that button to someone else. Now, she's placed the button into an envelope and sealed it with the plan to give the envelope to someone else. Now, there is nearly an accident that Christine and Clay get into in the car, which causes her to drop the envelope onto the floor of the car with a bunch of papers. She freaks out momentarily, thinking she's lost it, but she finds the envelope, and she goes into a diner, and she starts just watching people. She considers giving the button to a sick old man, but decides she doesn't really have the stomach to do that. She considers then blackmailing her coworker by saying that she thinks that he took the paperwork off her desk for that big loan that would have sealed the deal for her promotion and somehow worked that deal in his favor. So she tries to basically say to this guy that, hey, I know what you did. I'll tell our boss. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you this gift and it now becomes yours and you must always look after it. But even that she doesn't really have the heart to do. So she then wonders and asks Ram Dass, hey, if I were to give this to the old lady, if I were to dig up her body and give it to her, would that actually count? And he says, yeah, with a lot of Roma and gypsy kind of stories, the spirit lives on forever. So yeah, conceivably, if you gave her the gift, if you make it a formal, if you make a formal gift to the body, the spirit would have to take it and it would take possession of the curse. So she digs up the old lady's corpse and shoves it right in her mouth. So she goes home to get ready for a weekend trip with Clay and learns that her coworker confessed to stealing a file or that file from her desk and ruined that big deal. And her boss says, hey, we got rid of that guy and we're promoting you. Good job. At the train station, she buys a new coat because she doesn't want to ever see that one coat that had that button ever again. Now, Clay is a little disappointed because he found an envelope in the car that had that button she was trying to give away in it. And it turned out that it was another envelope that got mixed up with the one that had the button in it. And what she put in the old woman's mouth was just simply not what she thought it was. Shocked and horrified by this, she backs away, falls onto the platform falls off the platform onto the tracks with another train coming, and the ground opens up and hands grab Christine to pull her into hell before Clay can do anything to even try to rescue her. So let's talk about the three things that I like about Drag Me to Hell. The first thing that gets a like is the fight with the old woman in the early part of the movie. There's a lot of Sam Raimi stuff going on here. First of all, it starts with the old lady's car being Sam Raimi's old 1973 Olds Delta 88. That's in all of his movies. I didn't have to look too hard to find it, so that's great. We got that handkerchief that floats around that almost seems like a kind of like a creature with a mind of its own. And it's almost mischievous in that way. And then we get a jump scare from that because it flies right into the windshield unexpectedly. Next, the old lady's sitting in the back seat waiting for Christine. You have to understand what's going on with this old lady. She's got some gross stuff going on. One, she has an eye that's all messed up. That's more spooky than gross, so let's try this. She's got a hacking cough that constantly produces phlegm that she kind of sloppily coughs into her handkerchief. Earlier at the bank, she took out her slobbery teeth to eat some candy that was on Christine's desk. But that's where the hilariously gross stuff takes off in the fight between her and Christine. When Christine ran her car into the van to cause the old lady to fly into the front seat and crash into the dashboard, her teeth fell out. In response, the old lady tries biting Christine's chin, but without her teeth, so she's just kind of sloppily gumming at her face. I mean, God, it's great and gross and hilarious. It eventually ends with the curse, but the gross old woman is so very Sam Raimi and so very wonderful. Second, yeah, that fight I was just talking about in and of itself is one whole thing to like. It's crazy, it's funny, it's wonderful, right? Well, I also really got to give it to Alison Lohman for all she has to put up with in this movie. There are multiple times in which the old woman grabs and pulls hair out of her head. There was the time that she got her chin gummed on in the car. She gets that, green embalming goo all over her face and mouth. She has that nightmare where she wakes up and the woman barfs like the sludge and dirt and worms onto her face. That was, and then she vomits the blood and shoots some of it out of her nose all over her boss. She has flies crawling onto and into her face. There's a lot of practical effects there that she has to deal with, being just the stuff just put onto her, mostly her face. And sure, there's one moment where she hallucinates the old woman attacking her in the shed. So she drops an anvil that's for some reason in the shed, but whatever, it's the same Raimi movie. So of course there's an anvil waiting to drop on somebody's head. And when it crushes into the old woman's head, it causes her eyes and face to basically explode out onto Christine's face. Okay, that was CGI, but still, there were plenty of other things Alison Lohman had to deal with that just make you laugh. I mean, it's all of the grossest stuff in this movie is all comedic beats. And I mean, it comes across like some of the Evil Dead, particularly Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness stuff, that you just have to laugh at. That's the only reaction you can have. But seriously, here's this adorable girl next door just getting all the Raimi treatment, like she's freaking Bruce Campbell. And like I said, all you can do is just laugh at these moments. But thirdly, I love how simple this movie is. Things are painted with broad strokes. Christine is overly cute and pleasant. Even in the ways that when she's feeling good about stuff, the way she dresses is just over the top cute and over the top very girl next door, right? But she has this job that she is qualified for, but doesn't really have the constitution for. Her work has two people who are overly, nearly cartoonishly craven in their business etiquette. Her competition for the promotion is an ass kisser and just real smarmy. Her boss is cold and uncaring about the human side of business. He says things no boss should ever say to an employee about their position when there's competition for a job, like, how she's the top of the list, or how the other guy might just have to get the promotion because of this other thing that happened that was beyond her control, etc. It's almost cartoonish, right? Clay is the classic unbeliever when, in this, that we just see in so many movies. When there's supernatural stuff happening, he just flat out denies it and he has no respect for it. But it's kind of annoying how he laughs all of this stuff off, especially the first time we see Ram Dass. But later he does come around to helping her based on another fairly simple reasoning. He just simply loves her and always promised to take care of her. His mother is rude and awful in that nearly two-dimensional way that, you would almost always think if they get married, she's this woman's the awful, mother-in-law and all of that. It's just very thin, but it's all there for a purpose. All of that just helps you like Christine more. Characters can be thin and two-dimensional when there's a purpose or a reason or a parable to be had. Here's a sweet girl who makes a terrible decision and you feel bad for her, but everything else around her is so two-dimensional that you almost are seeing this story simply from her perspective. And it works for exactly what this is. And I use the word parable, and that's exactly what you have here. If you don't approach things from a caring perspective, or even from a humanist perspective, bad things happen. It's karmic. It's, and all of that just leads to, it's okay to have this very simplistic, broad strokes, two-dimensional thing that's happening around Christine. As long as Christine is likable and as long as she's not two-dimensional, or at least two-dimensional, it works perfectly for what this movie is trying to do. And that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon at filmseizure.com. But don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, and Instagram, and subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast each Wednesday and Monster Mondays at your favorite podcast providers, as well as YouTube. And you can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new review articles every Friday morning. Next up, let's talk about one of the two 90s films from Tales from the Crypt as we spend an evening battling a villainous demon knight. Until next week, stay spooky.